The nature of intrinsic motivation, a force that comes from within psychology, has devoted considerable attention to the study of motivation, and the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is one of the pillars of this field. Intrinsic motivation is characterized by its autonomy and the individual engages in an activity because he or she finds it interesting, challenging, enjoyable, or personally meaningful. The reward, in this case, is not something to be achieved in the future, but rather the experience of the activity itself. It is the process, and not just the result, that generates satisfaction. Think of a child who spends hours building a sandcastle on the beach. He or she is not doing it for money, for praise from adults, or to compete with other children. He or she is doing it for the sheer joy of building, for exploring the texture of the sand, for the feeling of creating something with his or her own hands. This is a clear example of intrinsic motivation in action. The reward is the activity of building itself, and the satisfaction that comes from it. The pillars of intrinsic motivation: competence and relationship self-determination theory, developed by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, is one of the most influential frameworks for understanding intrinsic motivation. SDT posits that humans have three basic and universal psychological needs that, when satisfied, promote intrinsic motivation and well-being. Autonomy, the need to feel that one has control over one's actions and choices. When we feel autonomous, we act on our own free will, rather than under external coercion or pressure. This does not mean total independence, but rather the perception that our actions are consistent with our values and interests. For example, a student who chooses to study a particular subject because it genuinely interests them, rather than because they are forced to do so, will experience greater autonomy. Competence, the need to feel that one is effective and capable of mastering challenges. When we feel competent, we are more likely to engage in activities that allow us to grow and develop new skills. Positive feedback and the opportunity to overcome obstacles are crucial to nurturing a sense of competence. A musician who practices an instrument diligently to hone his or her skills and play more complex pieces feels a strong boost of competence. Relationship, the need to feel connected to and valued by others. Humans are social beings, and the feeling of belonging to a group, of being loved and supported, is fundamental to psychological well-being and intrinsic motivation. Working in teams, participating in communities, and building meaningful relationships are all aspects that satisfy this need. When these three pillars are present in an environment, whether at work, school, or home, intrinsic motivation tends to flourish. On the contrary, the lack of autonomy, feelings of incompetence or social isolation can undermine this inner flame, leading to demotivation and burnout.
Intrinsic motivation at work, engagement, and productivity. In the workplace, intrinsic motivation is a crucial factor for engagement, satisfaction, and productivity. Companies that are able to cultivate an environment where employees feel autonomous, competent, and connected tend to have more innovative, resilient, and dedicated teams. Traditionally, many companies have focused on extrinsic rewards, salaries, bonuses, promotions, as their primary motivators. While these factors are important for satisfying basic needs, they have a limited effect on intrinsic motivation. In some cases, too much extrinsic reward can even undermine intrinsic motivation, a phenomenon known as the over-justification effect. When an activity that was once pleasurable and intrinsically motivating becomes associated with external rewards, the perception of the activity can shift from something done for pleasure to something done for the sake of getting a reward. To foster intrinsic motivation in the workplace, organizations can promote autonomy, give employees the freedom to choose how and when to perform their tasks, delegate responsibilities, and allow them to participate in decision-making. This does not mean anarchy, but rather granting them a sense of ownership over their work. Develop competence, offer opportunities for learning and development, provide constructive feedback, and recognize progress and achievements. Opportunities to take on new challenges and projects that allow for professional growth are also important. Stimulate the relationship. Create a collaborative and supportive work environment where employees feel part of a team and valued for their contributions. Social activities, mentoring, and fostering a culture of respect and trust can strengthen bonds. Provide meaning, connecting employees' work to a greater purpose. When people understand how their work contributes to the company's success or to a positive impact on society, they feel more engaged and motivated.
Intrinsic motivation in education. The pleasure of learning in the field of education. Intrinsic motivation is the engine of meaningful and lasting learning. An intrinsically motivated student does not study just to get good grades or to please their parents, but because the process of learning is in itself rewarding. It can be inferred that the educational system, often focused on assessments, tests and comparisons, can inadvertently stifle intrinsic motivation. The pressure to perform and the emphasis on external rewards can divert the focus from the pleasure inherent in learning. To cultivate intrinsic motivation in the classroom, educators can arouse curiosity, present content in an interesting and challenging way, using innovative teaching methods that encourage exploration and discovery, offer choices, allow students to have some say in what and how they learn by offering choices of projects, topics, or study methods. This increases their sense of autonomy. Provide constructive feedback. Instead of focusing solely on mistakes, focus on progress and strategies for improvement. Feedback should be specific and guiding, helping the student develop a sense of competence. Create a supportive environment. Foster a safe and inclusive classroom environment where students feel comfortable asking questions, making mistakes, and collaborating with peers. A sense of belonging is crucial, connecting learning to the real world. Show the relevance of the content to students' lives and the world around them, making learning more meaningful and engaging. Intrinsic motivation in personal life, well-being, and purpose. In addition to work and education, intrinsic motivation plays a vital role in our personal lives. The activities we choose to do for pleasure, such as hobbies, pastimes, and the time we spend in relationships, are often driven by this inner fire. When we engage in intrinsically motivating activities, we experience a state of flow, a concept coined by psychologist Flow is a mental state in which a person is fully immersed in an activity, with energetic focus, total involvement, and enjoyment in the process. It is a state of such intense concentration that time seems to fly by and worries disappear. Achieving flow is an indicator that we are deeply engaged in an activity that satisfies our needs for autonomy and competence. Cultivating intrinsic motivation in your personal life means identify your interests and passions, reflect on what really fascinates you, what makes you lose track of time, what energizes and inspires you. Seek moderate challenges. Engage in activities that are challenging enough to be interesting, but not so difficult that they are frustrating. The balance between challenge and skill is crucial to achieving flow. Prioritize time for hobbies and leisure. Set aside time for activities that bring you joy and personal satisfaction, even if they have no apparent extrinsic benefit. Nurturing relationships. Invest time and energy in meaningful relationships with friends, family and partners, as social support and a sense of belonging are fundamental to well. Living according to your values. Make decisions and engage in actions that are aligned with your deepest principles and beliefs. When our actions reflect our values, we experience a greater sense of purpose and authenticity.